Welcome back to the Dad Days, everyone. It has been a while since I made a video, but today I'm back and I'm making Einkorn Crust apple pie. Before we start peeling some apples, I just want to say thank you to anybody that has subscribed over the past couple months. For those of you that are new to this channel, I'm a stay-at-home dad with two boys. One has special medical needs, so needless to say, our family's pretty busy. But I'm going to do my best to continue to put out content, and I really appreciate all the new subscribers. Let's start peeling some apples. My wife's sister actually has a apple tree in her backyard, so these apples are from that tree. We have this nifty KitchenAid attachment that peels and slices and cores apples, so it's really handy and it does the job quick, so that's what I'll be using today. You just pop it right on, push this lever, make sure that's this little arm down here. It's hard to see, but there's an arm underneath of it that peels. Just make sure that's in place. You have to make sure your KitchenAid is plugged in. Then you just go for it. I'll compost the apple scraps. As you can see, it's not perfect. If the apple's not perfectly round, it doesn't take off every bit of peel. I'll go back through and clean it up a little bit more. Repeat those steps until you're done peeling the apples. We have a compost pile outside, so I'm going to save all the apple scraps to go throw in the compost. So there's the all the apples after they've went through our machine. I'm just going to quickly dice them up. I'd like them, for this particular pie, I'm going to do a small chop, so I'm just going to dice them all up. Okay, for this amount of apples, it's a standard size mixing bowl. I wasn't even paying attention. I think I did 5 or 6 apples. I'll be melting probably like 2 to 3 tablespoons of butter. Over low to medium heat. Slightly browning it. We have some apple pie spice, so I'll be using some of that with my apples, as well as a little bit extra cinnamon and a dash of cloves. I'm also going to be adding a heaping spoonful of honey. I'm using honey for my apple pie instead of sugar. We try to avoid white sugar at all costs. So I'm adding honey. Turning the heat down to low now. Melting this. I'm going to stir. Stir in my apples. Eyeball my seasonings. Just enough that you can clearly see it coat all the apples. I'm just going to add it on top and then stir it in and see what it looks like. Okay, I'm going to turn the heat back up and just cook the apples slightly until they just start to get soft. Okay, once they've been simmering a couple minutes and you can start to see the juice forming in the bottom of the pan, you want to just sprinkle in just a little bit of cornstarch at a time and stir it very well. And just wait about 30 seconds or so and see if it starts to thicken up. You want just enough cornstarch that it just starts to thicken up, because it'll thicken up more when you put it in the crust to bake it. So I'm sure that's going to be more than enough. I'll give it a good stir. I'm going to turn the heat down to low because it'll be coming off the heat very soon. Yeah, that looks good. So I'm going to take it off the heat so it doesn't overcook and just let it cool down. So that's what the pie filling looks like. Time for the crust. As I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be using einkorn flour. We're going to do 2.5 super precise cups of flour because that's how I bake. I'm going to use Redmonds real salt. About a teaspoon or so. I'm not doing any sugar in my crust. It might lean towards more of a savory crust, but it works really well with the sweetness of the pie filling. I'm just going to whisk the flour and the salt together. Earlier I popped a chunk of tallow into the freezer. I'm going to be using a grater and grating some frozen tallow, about 3/4 of a cup. You could also use butter. The key with pie crust is just keeping everything as cold as possible. You can see that it works really well to grate butter or tallow or whatever you happen to be using. I'm just going to dice this little piece up with my knife quick. I'm just going to be using a fork to incorporate it together. It doesn't hurt to throw your fork in the freezer for a couple minutes as well leading up to this. You just want to get it incorporated to the point that it is about the size of little pea crumbles or something to that effect. I wouldn't suggest using your hands for this because the heat from your hands will just be too much. it'll melt the butter or the tallow or whatever you're using. I also I've had some ice water chilling here. I'm going to be using about 2 or 3 tablespoons of ice water at a time. Just enough to get my dough to come together into one solid dough ball. Okay, at this point, it's pretty good. It's a little crumbly. I'm going to add just 2 more tablespoons. Now I'm going to put it into some saran wrap and get it smashed into one solid ball and then chill it in the fridge for at least 30 minutes. My dough has rested long enough. It's nice and firm. You know what, before I put it on the cutting board, I'm just going to dust the cutting board with a little more flour just to keep it from sticking. I'm gonna cut it in half and we'll see if we can get this rolled out nice. Now this might be a little more crumbly than a standard pie crust, so you just need to be gentle. Take your time rolling it out. Be careful with the cracks. You might have to continue to squeeze it in like that. Add a little more flour here and there. Try and carefully flip it. Continue to increase the size slowly and carefully. I already greased the pan with tallow. Okay, hopefully we can make the transfer. I'm going to be swift and quick. Okay, I think we got it. I'll just work on the edges now. Okay, I'm just gonna take a knife. I don't consider myself a dessert baker much, so you're not going to see any kind of fancy design from me. I'm just going to take the edges off. I might use some of the dough that I cut off here and try and work on making, just pinching a higher lip around the edge. Okay, that's as good as it gets. You can see I kind of built up the edge with the pieces that I cut off, but that's about as decorative as mine gets. So now I'm actually going to par bake this bottom crust. I'll use a fork and put some little holes in the bottom of the crust to try and keep it from puffing up too much. I do have one baking rock. I'm going to put a rock in the center to try and help with that as well. And I think I'm going to bake it at 350 for about 10 minutes before I add the filling. 10 minutes done. Good that I put the stone in there. I think the par bake was a good idea. I'm going to put the filling that I made earlier into the pie. I went ahead and rolled out the top crust while the bottom was par baking in the oven. Let's try and quickly maneuver this over. Bingo. Again, I'm going to carefully crimp the edges. Once again, I am not a fancy pie baker, so don't expect that. Okay, that's the top. I'm going to just cut a couple slits into the top to allow steam to escape. There we go. And it's going back in the oven for at least 45 minutes. I'll check it at 45 minutes and we'll see what it looks like. I'm just going to use a little butter and rub the top of the pie with butter. Okay. That is the finished Einkorn Crust apple pie. For those of you that don't know, einkorn is a variety of wheat. In fact, it's recognized as the oldest variety of wheat, dating back to over 12,000 years. That makes it non-GMO.